Okay, so the first thing that I wanted to talk about with this new episode of everything is decentralization and centralization. Now, I kind of talked about this when we went into the dialectic in the previous one, but this particular dialectic I think deserves some further analysis, so let me just go into it a little bit more. So, what is centralization and what is decentralization, right? Let's get started with that. Centralization, I would classify as the belief or the force that pushes things to become bigger. It's the thing that unifies processes instead of separating them. And in doing so, its purpose is to try to reach a higher efficiency and to be able to do things with greater widespread reach than decentralization will be able to do. And decentralization, conversely, is the force that tries to push things to be more personalized, more spread out, and more free. I would define it in this terms. If you have any disagreement with those, you can take them up with me, of course. Let me know in the comments whether you disagree with just the fundamental assumption I'm going to make here. So maybe you disagree with the rest of what I have to say too. But if we're going to disagree with that, we might as well get started right off the bat. So what do you mean by centralization and decentralization, right? So I think it's useful to start out with some examples. It used to be back in the day, let's say the 1970s, that a lot of the forces that we think of now as the ones that drive the greatest powers in the world, such as the military industrial complex and like big pharma, big agro, stuff like that, weren't as organized as they were today. They were involved in lobbying efforts and the like. And really, you could say the modern notion of lobbying got started in that era, but really they weren't as organized and as collaborative as they are today in influencing policy and making decisions with the government that help them so blatantly, right? That's something that we kind of take for granted now, but that really wasn't the case back in the day. So what made them do that? Well, the thing is, as I talked about in the previous everything, when you have a capitalistic system which encourages not competition, but maximum profit, which you might think is the same thing, but it's actually not really. I explained it last time. What happens is they all group up for a common good, which is good, right? That's like a goal to aspire to. But when they do this, what ends up happening is they're not allowed to form one big company. That's against the law, right? Monopoly laws prohibit that. So what they do instead is they use their powers together to lobby. And when they lobby at the level of the federal government because the federal government is extremely centralized. And by the virtue of them being centralized, they hold a lot of power that can be dictated downwards, right? And when they do this, it has more widespread reach than if they were to focus their money on the local elections, even though the local elections would be easier to influence and to win and to arrive with candidates who would make more of a difference at a much lower price. They would rather just focus all their money into one effort to get all of it in one go, right? That's like their goal. So when they do that, they can achieve a larger amount of success in whatever effort they're going out to do. So let's say like deregulating safety standards for workers or something banal, like that. When they do something like that, they want to do it at the level of the federal government because then it'll get handed down. Okay, so why are you saying that this is a problem of centralization? Well, generally libertarians and some Republicans believe that states' rights should be the thing. And they say that this helps with dealing with these kinds of things because the federal government can't dictate what you can or can't do. They only give you a certain amount of money. By decreasing the amount of money they give you, that you decrease the amount of influence that they have on you. And by doing so, you have more freedom. So it seems to me with this, let's say, dialectic, you have freedom and higher risk on one hand, and on the other hand, you have safety and less freedom. So these are the dialectics of, or this is the dialectic of centralization and decentralization. Okay, let's talk about decentralization now. What do I mean by decentralization? Okay, there used to be a time when the dollar was based on the gold standard. All of it was controlled by the Fed, the interest rates and whatnot, and it was very proactive in determining what kind of fiscal policy was good for the country. But now it doesn't really do that. It kind of does that every 2 years. They kind of make a decision that to lower or raise the rates and move the economy this way or that. But they're not as active as they used to be. They're not as activist as they used to be. Also, you could say they used to participate in one example that I like to cite, although this doesn't have anything to do with the Federal Reserve, is in the early 40s, there was a consortium of movie studio owners that tried to monopolize certain theaters, or like take over theaters and try to restrict people's choice by saying that these theaters can only run movies from our studio, and make them sign large contracts to buy films in bulk instead of each one by itself. So if you wanted the good movie, like a Casablanca or something, you had to buy all this other garbage that they would just make you run because they needed some money from it. So they declared that anti-competitive. Congress did, and they passed a law saying this is illegal. You can't do this, specifically for movie studios. So they like stepped in and regulated, right? That seems to me like a very centralized approach. But now we don't really see that. That's not really the type of activity we see. Like the latest activity that I would say is like activist in tendency, like to pass a law with a specific purpose, would be like the banning of Huawei from installing 5G in the US. But that's really not related to like an activist Congress. It's really more to do with like national security concerns. I think they don't want to be spied on. So really it's more of an intelligence thing than an economic thing. So when I was talking about decentralization and centralization, let me cite a more recent example. Decentralization, I think one of the driving forces of decentralization in this era is cryptocurrency, and not cryptocurrency specifically. I'm just saying cryptocurrency so you'll understand what I'm talking about, but I mean blockchain technology in general, because the blockchain technology developed by a Japanese person, or perhaps not a Japanese person using a pseudonym, is, I think, one of the most powerful decentralizing forces in technology maybe ever, right? There used to be a time when people didn't even have phones in their own houses. If you've ever been to a third world country, like in 2005, 2006, you'll know what I'm talking about. People don't have phones in their own houses, so they had to go to a phone booth down the street to make any kind of call, right? And that was a limiting factor. The technology wasn't easy enough to spread at a low enough cost that it could be widely available. Now, we don't have that problem anymore because of phones, and phones are very easily decentralized because they don't need any other infrastructure other than the phone itself and the charging device, which means accessible electricity of some kind. And as unprivileged as most of the world is, I think a large proportion of the population of the world does have electricity of some extent. Maybe not even a large proportion, but a large number of people have access to electricity so they can charge their phone. And the only other infrastructure that you need to use the phone is the phone itself, and then cell phone networks. We'll talk about that later. So I was talking about blockchain. Now, blockchain is important because it spreads the verification of the transaction, which is the most important thing in a currency, right? You have to verify that someone paid, and they're not just saying they paid. The thing has to actually move. They use the blockchain to verify that. And what's so impressive about the blockchain itself? The blockchain is decentralized. It's not in any one place. It's all over the place. Every single person who runs the blockchain on their computer for mining or whatever, that's how mining works, by the way. If you're mining on your computer, you're verifying transactions. That's what you're doing. So you're speeding up the network. The more people there are mining, the more people that are making sure that transactions are actually taking place by confirming it all between themselves that this transaction is legit. This person has enough whatever coin to make this transaction. Okay, so why am I saying that that's cool? Let's take, for example, voting. Voting through blockchain. I know it's a buzzword, but let's actually talk about it. Voting through blockchain is, I think, a possibility. I think it could happen reasonably soon. I think the only thing that we need to safeguard against is how we store people's private keys, because private keys generally have gotten stolen in the past. That's really the only point of failure of blockchain and security system, because you can't hack it. You can't fake a transaction. To fake a transaction, you would need the majority of all the computers on the blockchain to verify a transaction. And that's basically impossible unless you are like 3 of the largest states in the world, which, I mean, if they wanted to, I guess, but it would be disproportionately difficult to do. And I don't think it's something they would do on a regular basis, maybe just to get like an Edward Snowden or something like that. I don't think they would do it for anything else. So let's talk about voting. Why is voting important? Well, the thing is, voting is cool in this way, voting with blockchain, because you don't have to know the identity of who they voted for. You can just verify that the transaction took place, and the message itself could be coded, and the smart contract that it arrives at could just verify or unhash the decision that they made, and then use that to tally the vote at the end. So you don't, in like when the vote is in motion, you don't know who they voted for. But at the end, it's all tallied and you know who won the election, okay? I know none of that made sense. if you need to know more about blockchain, I said go research it because I really don't want to explain the whole thing. So why is that impressive? Well, let's see. You have a distributed means of counting, or a distributed means of making sure that something is democratic. It's directly democratic. It doesn't have any overhead, very low overhead. The only overhead is that you have to have some machine capable of accessing the internet, which I think in a developed country like the US or Canada is a very low bar. And it's something that you can easily make sure that every citizen has at least passing access to, right? You don't need to have a house to have a phone to vote. So if you have that system, what are you able to do? Well, let's take a look at it, shall we? So let's say you can vote for whatever measure directly from your phone. This could be votes that affect your local municipality. It could be votes that affect the state, the county, the country in general, right? What are you able to do? You're able to have just as fast elections as there are now. Votes could be counted in a single day, maybe even less, maybe a few hours. We don't know how fast the system will be. It all depends on how many miners there are to confirm the transactions. Number two, the system could be directly democratic. What does that mean? Directly democratic means you're not electing representatives to represent you. That means that if any one person wants to influence a decision, it will take them a lot more time and resources than it would now. There is a small counterpoint to this, and I'm going to say it now so I can break it down. Here we go. The counterpoint is it's far easier to influence an entire population than it is to influence a single person, or it takes less money because TV and internet ads are so cheap nowadays. Okay, to that I say there are already election commissions to regulate how what kind of advertisements you can make to support a candidate or other, and people get around that by saying concerned citizens of America or whatnot. And I think we could come up with a system to deal with that. But I do think that having a directly democratic system is beneficial. Now, I'm not saying that it has to be like snap, like one day you make the proposal, next day they vote. I actually think it should be more of an open source system where the legislation is written by like a community of individuals who are concerned about it. Just like operating systems like Linux are maintained by individuals who are interested in it. And that seems to be doing pretty well. And you could be able to tell who wrote what part of what law. So we don't have this problem where companies are just straight up handing laws to politicians to introduce in Congress, and then we have to deal with the repercussions of it, right? We don't have that. That's one example of what decentralization could do. Let's talk about another example. Here's another example. Solar panels, right? The power grid is a concept that's pretty old. It's been around for more than 100 years, and it's something that we just accept as necessary, right? The power grid is very expensive to run. It's very expensive to maintain, and it leads to some strange situations we have now where in certain counties, everything is just powered by like non-renewable fuels and fossil fuels and things like that. And that's something that people who live there just have to accept because the power company is run by the state and there's no other option to go to, right? Now, with a decentralized technology like what we see before us, this is one of the forces that I was talking about, is a decentralizing technology like solar power, right? You can have solar panels installed on your house, and you can have a battery, and then you should be good to go in most places, right? These days, there's a pretty large rebate for solar panels, so it makes it less expensive than it actually is. So it doesn't effectively reflect the cost of what it costs to make solar panels. But there is a movement in the industry to decrease the price because they know that price is the sticking point with customers, right? If powering your entire house costs like $3,000 for your entire life, you would do it right now, but it doesn't. It costs much more than that. And we don't know how much the battery technology is going to scale because that hasn't really been tested so far. But the Gigafactory and other projects that Elon Musk is pursuing in the US and China should help with that in theory. We don't know yet how well it will scale to the level of holding power enough for a house for a day, but we do know that in theory it does work. Like lithium ion is a really good technology. Okay, so what does this say about decentralization? What does this have to do with decentralization, right? With solar panels, in places like Puerto Rico, after the last hurricane that hit, they were able to deploy power to certain houses without rebuilding the grid. And in places like India, where there are remote villages way out in the country or way up in the mountains or whatnot, they don't have to build the grid to get electricity to those places, because really it's not the grid that people want. It's the electricity, right? So if we can get electricity to communities that didn't have them before at a fraction of the cost by embracing a decentralizing force like solar panels, like for example, there's a village in India, I think, where they put solar panels in. It's in a very sunny state. There's not really any chance of them not having sun because there's not really any rain there. And with this electricity, they're able to run the lights at night because the sun sets super early and stuff like that. I don't know if it's able to power refrigerators and things. Maybe they can't afford those, but at least electric lights and radio. That's good, right? Better than nothing. For minimal cost. And really, I think that's what decentralization offers is the ability to do things with very little overhead, because you don't have a giant superstructure to go through to do things. And I know that doesn't vibe with what I said before, but the aim of bureaucracy is to be more efficient, but it really fails at that. It ends up causing more loopholes to jump through. Take that one. That's a Freudian slip. And causes people to know the system to do better than people who just earnestly want to get things done. Okay. That's decentralization. Let's talk about centralization now. Centralization, I think, is one of the forces that we're dealing with that we haven't figured out the answer to. And we don't know if the answer is to decentralize or to centralize smarter or whatever. But I think one of the bigger examples of this is in the early internet, there used to be a multitude of websites that people visited, right? This is like a truism. People say this all the time, is that there used to be a day when people used to just go to comics websites and just read the comics there, right? But now we have so many aggregator sites that the only thing that people care about is what they see on the aggregator site, and it's convenience. It's a matter of convenience because people don't want to have to travel from site to site looking for the content that they like. They want to just see all the websites in one place. Like, it's just more convenient that way. And that's, I think, the same philosophy behind the centralization of the mom and pop store, right? Walmart now controls the vast majority of most of the groceries that are bought in the US. We don't know if Amazon will take care of that, but that's included in this too. But the mom and pop store used to be this like local run thing that used to only offer certain products. And people were like, hey, why do I have to go to your store for this and that store for that? Why can't I just all have it in one place? And it's a matter of convenience and pricing. That's really what it is. So if you're able to offer convenience and pricing, why would I not go to your store? That's how Walmart took over, and that's how these internet companies are taking over. YouTube is the home of internet video. There's no other place. If you're going anywhere looking for video, it's going to be hosted on YouTube and embedded on their website. Nobody hosts their own videos anymore. And the only other places that show video is places like Netflix and HBO Go and things like that offer premium offerings that distinguish themselves from YouTube in that way. If you want to watch free videos, there's only one place to go, and it's YouTube. If you want to connect with your friends, there's only one place to go, and it's Facebook. Now, there are other places now, but those are also mostly owned by Facebook. We don't know when Facebook will buy Snapchat or when Snapchat will die, but the majority of online social meeting places are owned by Facebook and Twitter. Facebook and Twitter. That's still two places compared to what used to be hundreds of forums, hundreds of IRC chat sites, like you remember this. So what does that mean? Well, it means convenience, frankly. It means convenience. It means economies of scale. Like Gmail lets you have unlimited email. They let you have 15 gigs of free storage. They're giving that to hundreds of millions of people. The only way they can afford to do that is because they're all in one place. If I started an email server client tomorrow, I couldn't afford to give you 15 gigs of space. That would be insane. How many people would I would have one, maybe two hard drives to give to the server. I'm not going to let you have 15 gigs of space. That means I could have maximum like 200 people on this server. That's a horrible idea. So the only reason that they can offer all this is because they operate at such a large level that they can just do that. They're just that big. Now, how do they make money? Well, the unfortunate circumstance of centralized businesses is that they're usually publicly owned. And when they're publicly owned, that means they're incentivized to increase profit. And that's like an obvious thing. But another thing is they succeed by buying or tamping down. They succeed by buying their competitors, right? Look at Facebook in the past 2 years. They bought WhatsApp, they bought Instagram, they're buying a multitude of other data processing businesses and things like that could potentially grow to be competitors of theirs. And they're doing this because they have all this power already. They're a huge $200 billion company. And for them, buying a small company is no big expense at all. But that's because it's a centralized marketplace. It's only 3 or 4 real players, which is Facebook, Google, and Amazon. And those are the only people that offer any kind of internet services, and they offer them as a lump sum package. And people accept that because it's more convenient. But is that necessarily better, right? And this video is not really about judging which is better, decentralizing or centralizing. That entirely can be left up to you. What I want to put forth is that there are two forces pushing in opposite directions in the time that we occupy right now. Because on one hand, you have there's this example which I heard from the pub crawl that Digi was talking about, which is PeerTube, which is like a decentralized version of YouTube that uses like torrent style peer-to-peer video sharing, which I don't think is going to take off, and I'll maybe talk about that in a different video. But the reason that is so attractive is that you have your own personalized thing, and that videos are decentralized, so they can't be taken down. They can't be taken down for copyright and things like that. That's one among many things. I don't know how you would monetize that, but people don't even monetize that nowadays, right? That's like a whole different thing. People don't monetize on YouTube. The ad revenue doesn't really make the majority of your money anymore, so it doesn't really matter as much. I was talking about Facebook. So Facebook and Google, they're like the giant centralizing forces. There are these huge hundreds of billions of dollars worth companies that are able to dictate terms to customers that customers can't refuse because they're too powerful, right? They're too big. Try using a phone without a Google service. It's basically impossible. You can start off by using an iPhone, but what are you going to do after that? Are you not going to use Gmail? Are you going to use like Outlook or something? You think Microsoft doesn't do what Google does? You're going to use Apple Maps? What are you going to do? Google owns Waze, I think. So you have these giant centralizing forces on one hand, right? And then on the other hand, the centralizing forces are trying to like dictate terms. They're trying to get even bigger. Like Sinclair Media just tried to merge with Time Warner, I think it was a couple weeks ago. And the FCC almost approved it. At the last minute only, they stepped in to destroy that, because that's such a bad idea. When you promote more and more centralization, you're basically destroying the variety of opinion that can be obtained from any given point, right? And it seems to me like if you have one central organization, like for example, dictating the news of an entire country, it's obvious that you're not going to have as varied opinions as you would have otherwise. It just seems self-evident to me, but apparently that's not the case. And there was a ruling last week where the FCC tried to say that having one ISP in a locale is competitive somehow because there are other ISPs in other locales, but that seems just like fundamentally counterintuitive to me, because it doesn't matter whether the companies are competing with each other. That's not the point of competition. It matters whether the consumer has a choice. That's what it's supposed to be about. But the court judge didn't think so. He was talking about how the companies are competing with each other just in different areas. I don't know. That's weird. That's another one of those centralizing forces. So let me try to synthesize this. Let me try to do a Hegelian synthesis on this, forced or otherwise. I'm reading a book currently called Decolonizing Dialectics, which I think I might talk about in the future, where the author doesn't really like Hegelian syntheses. He prefers I don't know what he prefers. I haven't reached that far yet. I only started. So let me do a Hegelian synthesis on this, or at least give my opinion on where I, one, think it's going to go, and two, where I want it to go, right? So this is where the objectivity ends, or the attempted objectivity anyway. This is where my extremely subjective opinion comes into it. So what I was thinking was, imagine a world where everything is decentralized. Not everything, just the forces that I was talking about before, about the decentralizing forces. If they come to power, what do we have? Let's think about it. So we would have a currency that's not dictated by any one bank, and that allows you to do transactions like over the internet without any middleman. So you don't need a credit card company or anything like that. So the only thing I would have to do to set up an online store is to host it myself, and then you could pay me directly through the blockchain. It would be that easy. Point two, the political system would be directly democratic, and people would be able to voice their opinion directly. They would need a representative. The legislation and stuff is not concerning me right now. That's a different thing. The power grid would be decentralized, you would have solar power wherever you can have it, wind power maybe, like communities could decide for themselves what kind of power they wanted. This could work on the level of a municipality or even like a whole city. We don't know, but it is possible to do completely decentralized power or any scale up or down. It's completely possible. You can do it on the level of a single unit in an apartment. You can do it on the level of a city. You can do it on the level of a state, right? It could be any one of those. Indoor plumbing, I'm not sure how it's going to work, but maybe it's like a compost thing if you live in the woods, but I don't think that's very important here. That's not what I was trying to say. The last thing that needs to be decentralized, I think, for technology to really and truly openly develop without an influence from the top down to maintain the current status quo, is to have a decentralized internet. Now, if you've watched the show Silicon Valley, you kind of know what I'm talking about. In season 3 or 4, they introduced this idea of PiperNet, where the entire internet is decentralized. And that's not a new idea. That's actually been thrown around a lot. And there's even a project currently which uses a browser based on the blockchain. It's not very fast from what I know, and there aren't many sites on it yet. But it is an idea that exists, and I think it's worth mentioning, if only for that achievement that it is one of the first, if not the first, blockchain-based browser. Now, how would that work? Well, the entirety of the internet would have to be backed up in a multitude of different places. And I'm sure there are tech people that would be more than willing to do this. And it will be like, if you've ever used a torrent, you know how it works is you get seeded the content by other people who've already downloaded it. So in this version of the internet, you would be seeded the site by other people who are hosting it. So hosting wouldn't be done at one centralized server. It would be done all over the place. And the only thing that would really need to be centralized is the internet exchanges and the wires. Now, I haven't thought of a way that this could be decentralized with any usable latency at all, because the only way that I can think of is to use a series of satellites or Google type balloons, which one is very prone to failure, and two, introduce a large amount of latency that I don't think anybody wants. So if we just give the entire internet infrastructure over to the public domain and say, hey, the internet is decentralized now, because it's being controlled by a series of governments. I think mostly the US. I think they're turning over control to some people in a few years. Don't quote me on that. But until now, it's been controlled by the US. So that is, I think, the last milestone that needs to be achieved for decentralization to actually take heat and snowball down the mountain, because the internet is like the most important technological tool of our generation, if not for a few generations to come. So if you can decentralize that and keep it out of the hands of centralized power, for example, in a country where students were writing an exam, the government cut the internet to the entire country for the duration of the exam period, which was a few days or something. Now, that might seem like a benign case, but it's like, it starts there, but where does it go? If there's a coup happening in the government, do the military people cut the internet to the entire country if there's only 2 cables going through? Is that possible? Do we want that to be a thing that can happen, right? That seems to be the most scary future case for me, where the other decentralizing processes have come through, but really they don't hold any power if the internet itself isn't decentralized. On the other hand, what do I think is going to happen? Okay, this is what I think is going to happen. Google, Amazon, Facebook all either merge or cooperate behind the scenes to like draw very clear lines between what they do, and they just take over everything, right? They know everything about everything. They're able to market to you so effectively that you just do whatever they say, because there's no it's not illogical to do it. It's illogical to not do it. They know your mind so well that what they suggest for you will actually be more fitting you than what you could suggest for yourself, right? So the whole point of this whole free information, giving you free services, has been to gather information about you. And there are like databases now that have multiple hundreds of points of information about one specific person. And they're all termed under the term anonymous metadata. Like, they don't specifically describe anything that you did. They just describe various behaviors over time. Like, for example, your average heart rate during the day, when it peaks, when it dips, and they don't have to be collected under your name specifically, but they know so many things that it's pretty easy to draw lines between them. Let's say you made a credit card purchase at 10:30 in the morning at a particular Kroger store. They don't know that you did that, but also another unrelated set of location data shows that a certain person was there at that store at that particular time and went back to a different store, a different bar, and they can like correlate these 2 things. It's only 2 things to determine who you are, right? And they can do that with literally hundreds of entries in a single database on you. So they could have such granular things. Recently, there was a story that said that Twitter is recommending people for you to unfollow. And it got me thinking. Actually, I was watching the Level 1 News and they said this. It's like, if they have access to your Fitbit data and they just say like, oh, when you look at this particular Twitter page, your heart rate goes up and your stress levels go up. Or in the future, if they have like access to your bloodstream or whatever, like we send stress hormone in your blood when you see this. So please don't, we advise you not to follow this anymore. It'll basically be like an all-knowing, all-seeing entity that you've voluntarily just given information to for years and years. And at the end, they have this all-encompassing profile on you that literally knows you better than you know yourself. Like Amazon a few years ago at this point, this is 2018, a few years ago, they had the idea to, when a person browses a certain item on Amazon, they have this data that shows them that they're going to buy it within the next certain amount of days. So to make delivery even faster, instead of waiting for you to buy it, they just ship it to the nearest fulfillment center to you and then wait for you to buy it, and they get it to you within an hour. And they're like, oh, hey, you want this right now? We can get it to you within an hour. And you're like, oh, that's so cool. How is that possible? It's because they know so much about you. They know where you pause at on the web page, what you're looking at. And this is all only possible because Amazon is such a big thing. It's such a huge company. Jeff Bezos by himself is worth more than $150 billion when Amazon's stock price peaked recently. So they have all this power because they're centralized. Now, is that necessarily a bad thing? Think about it. You had to leave your house before and go to the grocery store and they wouldn't have your favorite avocado, or they wouldn't have avocados at all. They wouldn't have fucking random cucumbers and shit. Like, you don't know what they had. They would just buy whatever they thought they had. They didn't have any data to show them like what products actually sell on what days and stuff like that. You have that convenience now. You can go to the store and get that, and you won't even have to go to the store in the future. Amazon bought Whole Foods. They're just going to ship you all the groceries that you buy anyway without asking you, and just charge your credit card. Isn't that the most convenient? You don't even have to make the decision. It just comes to your house. It's the most convenient possible. Do you feel a little used when that happens? The first few times, I'm guessing yes, but what about the next 7 times? Do you feel confused then? Do you feel like you're just being used for your money? Or do you feel like, hey, Amazon is so thoughtful, they just sent me stuff that I needed? Do you feel like that? And what percentage of the population is going to feel one way versus the other, right? Is it going to be all consensus of, oh, hey, this is really creepy, stop doing this, Amazon? Or is it going to be like, oh, hey, Amazon, that's so cool, I didn't even have to order it, I just thought about it, and then 15 minutes later it showed up, like I just think that, oh, there's no mac and cheese in the shelf, and then Amazon realizes that I thought this and just sends the mac and cheese over, right? Isn't that better? Isn't that a better system for everyone? What is the alternative? Like 75,000 mom and pop stores that may or may not have the certain brand of mac and cheese that you want? Is that the alternative to this? Is that what you really want? I don't know. Is that okay with you? Who knows, right? It doesn't make any sense to go completely one way or completely the other. We don't know what's going to happen, but I think most likely this is what's going to happen. That's just my educated guess, or not even educated guess, just wild guess. We don't know which way it's going to go. So I must caution that you don't take any of this as gospel, Please take it with the biggest grain of salt possible. I'm wildly speculating about the future, but if anything about the last 40 years proved to be consistent with the future, we're going to end up in a future where power and money are so radically centralized that we won't really have that much choice about what we do with the money that we have. There used to be this practice back in the day where people used to pay their workers, or like certain big companies in remote areas used to pay their workers in money that they could only spend on the company's goods. For example, they would run a general goods store and you could only spend your banana bucks there, for example. And they would provide you food and shelter. And they could say this is not indentured servitude because you're being paid, but actually it's indentured servitude because you don't have any choice in the matter. You're just doing the work and you're getting the money, which you're not spending at all in any useful way. And then they would be just stuck spending that money there forever, and they wouldn't be able to make their way out even if they chose to. Is that the kind of system that we're heading to, right? Is it going to be to a point where countries are meaningless because governments are not powerful enough to stand up against corporations that are worth multiple tens of trillions of dollars? Is that where we're headed? Because Google and Amazon are this powerful now, And they haven't even started selling their products to the vast majority of the population of the world. They're still only at like 1/5 or something, or what's 2 by 7? Whatever that fraction is, percentage of the population, 28%, something like that. So what happens when they scale up to reach full critical mass? What happens then? Are they just so powerful? If anybody's ever read Snow Crash, you know kind of what I'm talking about. Neil Stephenson, which I don't think is a great book, but I do think some of the ideas in it are good, did mention this future where everything's a corporation, but he said everything was like a decentralized corporation because everything was just small business. Not everything, but a lot of stuff was smaller than the other stuff. It was just a vast animalscape of different sizes of corporation. But I don't think it's going to be nearly that idyllic. I think it's going to be much more monstrous when it eventually shows up. It's going to be like 4 or 5 huge companies that just sell everything. Like P&G already sells the vast majority of whatever you use in your house, from cleaners to soaps to like fucking everything. They sell everything that you use in your house. And then like there are like Black & Decker sell every kind of appliance, right? What if all of them fused into one like large commodities manufacturing thing on one side, and then you had Google on the tech side, and then that's it. That's like the beings that control the entire world, and we have no say in the matter. Is that something that we really want to go towards? I don't know. I think the world is headed in that direction. I'm not really much of a optimistic person, so I don't know what to say about that. But hey, you know, like we can only guess at this point and hope that it doesn't go that way. What does that mean for like the environment and stuff like that? I don't even know. This was purely just like a economic exercise. I wasn't trying to give a wide prediction about what would happen into the vast majority of the world if we were to like granularly go and examine every single decentralizing force. Okay, what's the thesis here? Let me sum it all up. Here we go. On one side, you have a large number of forces that are going towards centralization. What is centralization? Consolidation of power and resources into a lower and lower number of hands, right? And on the other hand, you have a variety of forces that are pushing towards decentralization. Now, what is that? Decentralization is like distributing resources and power to a vast majority of people, or just a large number of people in general, and then that being the controlling stake. So I would say it is top down versus grassroots, and not grassroots in like a civil uprising kind of way, just like as numerous as the strands of grass are numerous, right? That's really what I was trying to say. Okay, I hope that came across. I don't know, maybe I'll do another one of these in the future. I don't know, probably not. My throat hurts, so I'm gonna stop now. Okay, bye. Also subscribe.